Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and colleagues, I'm very glad to get the opportunity to lead the opening session for this conference on Jews in Germany today. That brings us together for 3 days in this beautiful campus. In the context of our topic, it is obvious that we have to deal with surprising developments, especially during the last 20 or 25 years. It is also obvious that the shadow of the Nazi rule in Germany between 1933 and 1945, World War II and the Shoah are very present in our minds, and that the relations between Germans, German Jews, and Israelis are still complicated. Now, let me introduce our speakers for this opening session, which is dealing with lights and shadows, modern history of Germans and Jews. First, Michael Wolffsohn. Our friend Wolffsohn is a child of this city, of Tel Aviv, and he is born here in 1947. Michael grew up in Israel and in Germany, and after high school he did his army service here in Israel from 1967 to 1970. Later on, Michael returned to West Berlin, studied political science and history at the Free University in Berlin. From September 1981 until June 2012, Michael had a chair of modern history at the University of the Armed Forces of the Universität der Bundeswher in Munich. It would be impossible here to mention all his well-perceived publications and lectures, his visiting professorships, and his social and cultural commitment in Germany. Michael has published for many others a standard handbook, Israel, which is updated in the course of some years all the time. He also published a lot on the Middle East conflict, on German-Israeli relations, and on German-Jewish relations. In recent times, Michael also paid more attention to the special relations between Jews and Christians. His most recent book is titled Über den Abgrund der Geschichte hinweg, deutsch-jüdische Blicke auf das 20. Jahrhundert, Overcoming the Chasm of History, German-Jewish Perspectives in the 20th Century. The other speaker is Ambassador Yoram Ben-Zeev. Yoram Ben-Zeev is like Michael, born Sabre. He was born on 20 July 1944. That means exactly on the day when Graf Schenk von Stauffenberg and his friends made their assassination attempt to Adolf Hitler. After his military service, Mr. Ben-Zeev studied at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem with a main focus on the Middle East. Then he started his diplomatic career, which brought him in the course of the years to Hong Kong, Manila, and Los Angeles. From 1983 to 1993, Yoram Ben-Zeev was an advisor of Israel's President Chaim Herzog with regard to foreign affairs. He was also responsible for peace negotiations with the Palestinians, and this for even 3 prime ministers, for Yitzhak Rabin, for Ehud Barak, and for Ariel Sharon. Yoram Ben-Zeev was also involved in the dramatic peace talks between Israel the Palestinian Authority and the US President Bill Clinton in the fall of 2000. From 2007 to 2011, Yoram Ben-Ze'ev was the ambassador of the State of Israel in Germany. First, Michael Wolffsohn will speak about Jewish communities in both German states from World War II to the Unification. Please.
גבירותיי ורבותיי, ידידי יוליוס, הייתי מת לנאום בעברית כדי להוכיח לכם שלא שכחתי את השפה, אבל נתבקשתי כמובן לדבר באנגלית, so now I turn into English. And I promise you to be politically less correct than my predecessors, and especially the German ambassador who had to leave, and I told him in advance that I would be definitely less correct and give somewhat more surprising explanations as to his key question, why Germany? I would like to proceed with 8 points. This is also much to do with, first of all, Jewish tradition and German Jewry, given the fact that, as Mr. Ambassador mentioned, last year Germany and German Jews had the public controversy about circumcision, about Brit Milah. But this is just mere chance and number mysticism. So 8 points. My first one being the geography of German Jews, especially the political geography. Second, a short chronology, or if you prefer, a short eventology of German Jews. Thirdly, demography, i.e. the demographic setup of German Jewry. Fourth, biography, dealing with some key representatives of the Jewish communities in East and West. The fifth point is about demoscopy, i.e. identification and identities of German Jews. The sixth point is theology, i.e. religion. What about religion among Jews? Are they really religious Jews, or what kind of Judaism do they practice? Seventh, economy and sociology, and my last point would be some brief remarks on historiography. Both Jewish communities in East and West until 1990 were tiny little communities and dying communities. In the end of the old Federal Republic, there were roughly 28,000 Jews living in the Federal Republic of Germany, and about 300 to 400, there are varying numbers, in East Germany. So, in effect, we are dealing with much ado about nothing if we refer to both Jewish communities until 1990s. But on the other hand, for not just symbolic, but also for political and moral and especially geschichtspolitical reasons, these communities were in a way central to the all-Jewish and also Israeli question, how to deal with the country of the former perpetrators. My first point is about political geography and why Germany, and there is a very easy and pragmatic answer to that beyond ideology and beyond key moral questions. Why Germany? Because West Germany, and this was the central point where Jews began their new affair with Germany, West Germany was the easternmost place of the West. And this is why the survivors of Nazi hells, of the liquidation camps who left East Europe because East Europe was anti-Semitic, criminally, actively, liquidatorily anti-Semitic, following the Shoah, following the Holocaust. And this is why the survivors of the extermination camps moved westward, and the easternmost place of the West was Germany. Full stop. Beyond the approximately 3,000 German Jews who had survived by chance, were these survivors of the extermination camps who moved westwards. And between 1945 and 48, i.e. the creation of the State of Israel, there were roughly 500,000 displaced persons moving from East Europe to West Europe and therefore to Germany. First of all to West Germany, secondly to West Berlin, but mostly to the western zones of occupied Germany. The French zone was uninteresting because it was further to the west. The British zone was almost unacceptable because the British did not accept Jews. Why? Because they were afraid that the Jewish Agency and other quote-unquote Zionist agents would take away these Jews to Palestine, former British mandate, with its closed doors to the Holocaust survivors who wanted to go to Israel, really? Not really, because the Israeli or pre-Israeli representatives had a hard time to convince the Holocaust survivors to move to Palestine or later on to Israel, because these survivors were not very willing to move from, symbolically speaking, Auschwitz to the Mid-Eastern front. They had survived by chance, and of course, they were not too greedy to fight a new war. Very pragmatic answers. Why did they go to the yes, Dina, this was definitely, we know that from the files, and I refer only to empirical facts. I have studied the Israeli files about their efforts to muster displaced persons to Israel, and this was a fact that we have to consider. Why did they go to the American zone? Because the Americans were the most willing partners to accept Jews in new pre-federal Germany. So this is a short political geography which makes quite a lot of distinctions between the different zones, and of course West Berlin, which was, as you know, on the western part, American, French, and British, and the Soviet part of Berlin was less interesting. As to the GDR political geography, most of those who came to East Germany, roughly 1,000, so definitely less, who were willing to go to a communist country, because communism and the Jews had a very tricky story, to put it mildly and diplomatically, also until and before 1948, and the very difficult period, so to speak, between 1948 and 1953, the late Stalin period with its anti-Semitic policies. So that is, in a short overview, the geography of East and West German Jewish communities. Shortly, some chronological facts, eventology, so to speak. And there we should consider post-war German Jewish developments in a, I suggest or think, also a provocative thesis in a historical perspective. If we look at German Jewish history in the 19th and 20th century, we had, since the early 19th century, the period I would call a period of dissolution. Dissolution. The period of dissolution where Jews distance themselves from Jewish tradition. I refer to the majority and will show you empirical proof. The second short and most devastating period was, of course, the period of the final solution, and then happened a miracle. German Jewish existence had a kind of resurrection. The third period I would define for German Jewish history. So in the 19th and 20th century to this very day, we have the development from dissolution to final solution and resurrection. Some of the events, most important events, key events, chronology, in federal Germany as far as Jews were concerned. We have the period 1945 to 1948, 49. That was mainly the period of the displaced persons. We can argue about that later on, but basically this is the period of displaced person Jews. Then there is a practically empty, almost Judenrein, free of Jews Germany, because 28,000 compared with about 500,000 in 1933, and we know what had happened in between, shows you that Germany as a whole was in fact kind of Judenrein. In this period, 1945 to 48 and 9, it was of course a terribly difficult period, economically speaking, morally speaking, not only for Jews, but also for non-Jews. And the key word for that period was black market. And for obvious reasons, also Jews had to be active at and on the black market. And given the fact that these people were Holocaust survivors, and that was, of course, something to write home about, and to use toughness, yes, Jews were, relatively speaking, more successful on the black market than others. And that, in turn, in a way, rekindled a new kind of anti-Semitism. Here, these people, the Gentiles said, oh, the Jews. And some of them thought, finally, we got rid of them. And here they are back again, and they are so successful on the black market. Very difficult for the Jews, of course. And the majority of Jews who stayed in Germany for the reasons I tried to convey because of political geography felt guilty because, first of all, they had survived. Secondly, they did not go to Israel or any other diaspora country which was not willing to accept Jewish survivors. Not willing to accept them. So they stayed there in Germany, in the country of the perpetrators, being once again successful on the black market, feeling new anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism from which they tried to escape in Eastern Europe. Newcomers to Germany, which was completely unfamiliar to them, because they had been part and parcel of the East European culture in general and East European Jewry. It was a completely unknown country to them. Traditional East European anti-Semitism, and now old plus new anti-Semitism in Germany, a terrible mixture for these people. And that, of course, increased their own feeling of guilt vis-à-vis themselves, their families, and, of course, the Jewish people as a whole. In 1950, the Jewish Agency formulated an ultimatum to Jews in Germany, asking them to leave Germany within 6 months. If not, there would be a kind of cherem, a kind of excommunication, if such a thing is possible, in Jewry. Pam totchan, tamid totchan, ani lamadeti bechel totchanim. Once an artillerist, forever an artillerist. Once a Jew, forever a Jew. But that's another topic. Huh? Okay, so cherem, but not excommunication. And then in 1950, Heinz Galinski, whom I had criticized very openly and very often, and my friend Julius knows, he was the man who stood up in 1950 and told the Jewish Agency, the State of Israel, and the rest of the world, we had not survived in order to be decided upon, but we decide for ourselves where we live, and we have survived, not to be dictated where to continue to live. And in parentheses, if you compare that situation in 1950 and the behavior of German Jewry, which had a pretty tough time to stand up and say no, for good or bad reasons. I'm not dealing with judgments. I'm interested in analysis and empirical analysis. And if you compare that to the very fact that, as Dina Porat very diplomatically described, that no Jewish representative, today's representatives, was willing to participate at that conference, that shows you, again, diplomatically speaking, and in a way somewhat less diplomatic than the German diplomat, that things have changed. A new self-security may be overstated. I find it completely displaced, but this is my personal judgment, and I'm not speaking politically correct. But this is a new provocation. Maybe we like it, maybe we don't. But the fact that a top representative of the German Jewish community does not arrive to a conference dealing with German Jewry in the Jewish state would have been inconceivable in 1950, full stop. By the way, you didn't lose anything. But it is politically significant. And that is, in short, I would like to cut it short. The period of the early Federal Republic, contrary to common wisdom, was a period in which the general German public, yes, did deal with Nazi crimes. Take the fact that the Anne Frank diary was published in 1955. It was then put to many, many theaters all over the Republic, and people were not forced. They went voluntarily to these theaters where the Anne Frank diary was, quote unquote, performed. So it's a myth to pretend, as, by the way, also Inge Deutschkorn, who was mentioned, who gave a terrific speech on a couple of days ago on January 30th in the Bundestag, but that was wrong. It's simply wrong to restate ever and again that the German public did not deal with that and with these problems. So this is why, and I was living in West Berlin since 1954, and I belong to the very tiny group of German Jews, being of course a small kid, of German Jews who returned, and were able to stay there with all the moral difficulties, able to stay there because, yes, that public in general, despite the old Nazis and the new one, was willing to deal with these things. That's why they could stay. But until 1968, the 1968ers, the revolution, so to speak, or would like to be revolution, the traditional problem of German Jewish community in general and Germans in general who wanted to, quote unquote, overcome the past was the old and new right. But since 1968, you had also the problem of the new left. And the new left chose a very symbolic date to show its loyalty, its solidarity with Jews in general and German Jews in particular on November 9th, Crystal Night, 1969, anniversary of Crystal Night. They chose to plant a bomb in the Jewish center of West Berlin. That was a kind of new love letter of new Germans to the German Jewish public. The new left on November 9th, ladies and gentlemen, November 9th, purposely November 9th. That is significant. The ambassador only referred to the old and new right. Truly, that's a problem. But there is also, or there has remained, a problem within Germany proper of the new left being anti-Jewish, and I address myself to the Israeli public, to the State of Israel. To the State of Israel as a Zionist state, and it's not the equation of Zionism equals racism, but it's not far away from that. And this is why the new left joined forces with the Palestinian terrorists in the 1960s and 1970s until the end of the GDR, fortunately. And the GDR supported militarily, infrastructurally, politically the terrorist new left. I don't claim to say that the new left was anti-Semitic as a whole or anti-Israeli as a whole. But I draw your attention as a general public and also to us historians to look at this kind of anti-Semitism, which is very strong. We had in the 1980s many discussions about Geschichtspolitik, politics about history. Think of the Bitburg controversy, think of the Historikerstreit, Ernst Nolte and others. Think of Philipp Jenninger, then president of the federal parliament, of the Bundestag, with a speech which was, by the way, misunderstood. It was not anti-Semitic. It was a complete misunderstanding which later on people admitted. But given the public outcry because of these misunderstandings, Philipp Jenninger had to be slaughtered politically. Simon Wiesenthal, the late Simon Wiesenthal, protested to Chancellor Kohl, but then it was too late. So in a way, since the 1980s especially, you had a very interesting, less interesting, but interactive and emotional debate on the meaning of history for the general German public, and that, of course, had repercussions to the Jewish public. The GDR was a different story. The GDR was self-presentation, always on the right side of history, because communists were, quote unquote, also martyrs, so to speak, of National Socialism. So both communists and Jews had been persecuted by the Nazis. And therefore, there was a common bond between Jews and communists. This was at least pretended. But since 1948, that myth disappeared as a matter of fact, but it was upheld officially. Why in 1948? All people familiar with Eastern Europe and anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic developments in the late Stalinist period until Stalin's death in March of 1953 remember that following Golda Meir's visit to the Moscow synagogue, there was a backlash of new pro-Zionist, pro-Israel approach of the Soviet Union. And since September of 1948, there was an escalation of anti-Semitic measures in the Soviet Union and following the Soviet Union in the satellite states, including Eastern Germany. Somewhat less than, let's say, in Poland and in Hungary, and yes, of course, in the Soviet Union, but in general, there was a very militant anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic campaign, which led to the development that the majority of those who came back, and German Jews who came back to East Germany, left East Germany. And this is why, since early 1953, there were roughly 500, 400, 300 Jews in the end as a whole. There were also not Schindler's lists in the GDR, but Ulbricht's list, the East German dictator. There were twice lists of Jews in the GDR. Which I have personally found and checked in the former GDR archives. And a Judenliste, ladies and gentlemen, is not a very funny thing. And we know also from the Soviet Union that there existed Judenlisten as well. And these Judenlisten were transportation lists. That did not happen, fortunately, but this had been prepared twice, once in 1953 and for the second time in 1967, i.e. the beginning of the Six-Day War. מלחמת ששת הימים, זה היה המאורע שהכינו במזרח גרמניה רשימות של יהודים. בפעם השנייה. And since 1967, the German Democratic Republic supported, first of all, Egypt in its war of attrition against Israel, in which the Soviet Union participated. Oldies like me remember I was in Tzahal that Soviet pilots joined these fights. And the GDR also planned to send both planes and pilots. So did the GDR in 1973. במלחמת יום הכיפורים הם לא רק שלחו משלוחי נשק, אלא גם הכינו משלוח של שוב מטוסים וחומר אחר. This was the very strong relationship between the GDR and Jews in general and Israel in particular. Then happened an important change. In the mid-1980s, the GDR was, practically speaking, bankrupt. Full stop, bankrupt. And then happened, something strange happened on the way to the forum. This is a picture some of us know, but something strange happened to the GDR leadership. They remembered that, oh yes, the Jews were so successful, economically speaking, financially speaking, and first and foremost American Jews. And they were interested in getting most favored nation status from the United States of America. And then they remembered, oh yes, that American Jews were so influential. And this is why they mobilized the tiny Stasi-fied, I asked the Secret Service head overflooded Jewish communities in East Germany, and they asked this East German Jewish leadership to go to the US and to persuade the US administration as well as Capitol Hill to, yes, please give the GDR most favored nation status. And this is how and why the GDR, on the one hand, rediscovered the wonderful, quote-unquote, myth of the elders of Zion, that we, the Jews, control practically everything, and of course in America. And on the other hand, that with the Jewish factor, they could mobilize political support. Again, this is no invention by me. I have checked practically all files dealing with that, and when I published my book on that in 1995, I was kind of virtually stoned, but now it's common wisdom because facts are facts whether we like them or not. And then November 9th, 1989, the fall of the wall. The GDR tried to save itself by again trying to mobilize and to force Jewish support, international Jewish support, to keep two German states, because that was the running thesis of the GDR. A unified Germany would again persecute Jews. And the late Yitzhak Shamir said something similar on November 16, 1989. He then sent then Foreign Minister Moshe Arens to Berlin, and they decided to have a low-key approach, because the State of Israel rejected, Israel דחתה את המאמצים של מזרח גרמניה להציל אותה כמדינה עצמאית. The Israeli government refused to support the GDR efforts to keep two German states, because the Israeli administration realized that, yes, Germany unified would not constitute a danger to Jews in general and Israel in particular, and by now we know that this was a true prediction. US Jewry also declined to join forces. The GDR leadership tried to convince, first and foremost, the American Jewish Committee, politically the probably most influential American Jewish organization, and the American Jewish Committee said, thank you very much, GDR, we know you, kommt nicht in Frage. לא בא בחשבון. The only Jewish partner which did participate at the beginning was the World Jewish Congress under the leadership of Edgar Bronfman. But I don't have to tell the Israeli public that the World Jewish Congress, despite its name, is not the representative of the Jewish people, nekuda, full stop. But there were clear efforts which I was able also to prove. Yes, the World Jewish Congress tried to save the GDR, but as we know, did not succeed. And later on, and I congratulate the World Jewish Congress on that decision, they decided to get rid of Edgar Bronfman rather than to get rid of good relations to Federal Germany. My third point, demography. I, in a way, conveyed you the most important developments at the beginning of my speech, but there we should pay attention to the very fact that following the period of the displaced persons, you had a majority of non-German Jews living in Germany, mostly from Poland, and they were aligned to Germany in general and the German culture, let alone German Jewish culture, with, again, their sense of survival guilt. That was the majority of the Jewish rank and file, in the communities, but the leadership was made up of, quote unquote, old German Jews, or German Jews, and this is still the case. This is still the case despite the fact that since 1991, we had a huge influx of Jews from the former Soviet Union. But still, thank you very much, Handy is also a very popular instrument in Israel. Since 1991, a clear majority of former Soviet Jews, by the way, approximately 250,000, who came to Germany. 108,000 are only in the Jewish communities. Guess why? We come to that. And we have the Israelis. Yes, about 15,000 in Berlin. And the question of why Germany, which the German ambassador put here, is now wrong, like it or not. These Israelis come to Berlin because Berlin is a hype place. Most of the young Israelis and the other one that I know and look at what they publish and what they do, practically give a damn. It's surprising and also terribly less, almost nothing about German past. They're not there to go make pilgrimage to the Holocaust Memorial or other places. Berlin is fun. Ladies and gentlemen, what a terrific difference between 1945, 1950 and today. And compare this to what you heard from just the personification of the German ambassador. He has to say so, and he believes so. Lauter? Yes, this is the fact. Things have changed completely. Germans deal with that, so do Jews, but the less so, the younger they are. And so former Soviet Jews who come to Germany because this is a terrific place to live. They did not want to go to Israel. Israel, which did practically everything to free former Soviet Jews from the Soviet Union, as long as there was a Soviet Union. Israel paid much money in the beginning, as long as the Soviet Union existed. And they dropped out between 1975, following, first of all, from Vienna, and then they went to the United States of America, and then the State of Israel asked the US administration for very convincing reasons. Would they please put forward quota on Soviet Jews coming to America? And would they please remind these Soviet Jews that Israel, and not Federal Germany and not the US, freed these Soviet Jews. And this is why the Israeli rejection to having Jews from the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, coming to Germany was convincing. And the federal government was, in a way, taken between Israeli pressure, understandable pressure, which said, Chavrim, lo ba becheshbon. This is impossible. And once again, Heinz Galinski, the top German, I know I have 10 more minutes, my dear friend. I was told 45 minutes. I prepared that speech from Friday on because I was asked to fill the place of my friend Moshe Zuckerman. So now here I am, and I fill 45 minutes, full stop. Now we lost time, Julius.
Okay.
On the one hand, the State of Israel said, Lo ba becheshbon, and Heinz Galinski said, please let them in, because we are a dying community. 28,000 Jews, overaged. And this is the only reservoir that we have, and the German government could not say, I'm quoting Helmut Kohl, the former chancellor, we as the German government cannot and will not say to Jews who want to come to Germany, close doors. Impossible. Full stop. The GDR I can skip. Now, the short biography of the German Jewish leadership. The outstanding person is definitely Heinz Galinski, because he was the man who made two strategic, long-range, fundamental decisions. A, 1950, no to the ultimatum of, quote, unquote, the general Jewish community. And secondly, in 1990-91, please let Soviet Jews come into Germany. Heinz Galinski was a very bitter person, a very tough person, not liked person. German officials hailed him officially, but behind the scenes they wrote and spoke quite differently, quite differently. I know the files. They disliked him completely. He was a tough person. And I had also very tough arguments with Heinz Galinski, but he was always very fair, and more important, and at least as important, there was no graft. No corruption whatsoever under Heinz Galinski. You might have liked him or not, but Heinz Galinski was really clean. Financially, politically, you didn't have to like his positions, but he was clean. Another person who is very often mentioned is, of course, Ignaz Bubis. Ignaz Bubis was the Ronald Reagan of the German Jewish community. He was a great communicator, a gifted communicator, considered by the German public, or rather German officials, as a moral beacon. Somewhat shaken. Migdal Or, beacon is a Migdal Or. A moral beacon. Friends, tricky. I will give you one example, and there is historiography. There is practically no academic, serious biography, let alone autobiography of any of German Jewish officials, let alone Ignaz Bubis. And that's practically impossible, because files that deal with Ignaz Bubis's activities since 1945 with the Gusa, I don't specify about the Gusa here, you know, others know as well. Ignaz Bubis dealt with dental gold. This was illegal, and one of the top German journalists, Hans Leindecker from formerly Spiegel, now Süddeutsche Zeitung, wanted to find out in these files what happened with these rumors, because these rumors are central about Ignaz Bubis. Nobody speaks about them, but they are rumors, and these rumors are detrimental, both morally and politically, for both Germans and German Jews, because the rumor is highly delicate, but it's impossible to get to these files. The Gusa, first of all, denied that these files do exist, and now they say that the Bubis family is not willing to have them open. I appealed to this conference I'm not willing to do that, because I had some arguments with Bubis, and people might think that I would like to play a vendetta, which is definitely not the case. But I think that historical research had to find out. Because historical research did find out, or rather I did find out, that Heinz Galinski, contrary to another rumor, was not an agent of the GDR Secret Service. That rumor was also handed from one hand or mouth to the other in 1991 to 1995, until my book, Die Deutschlandakte, appeared, and they said, you know, Heinz Galinski, inoffizieller Mitarbeiter, unofficial agent of the Stasi, of the East German Secret Service. EM Rep was supposed to be Heinz Galinski, and people say, oh, you know, Heinz Galinski. And now today's President Gauck was the chief of that these archives, and I had a very hard time to convince Joachim Gauck, dear Mr. Gauck, please open these files if they are there. If this rumor is correct, we have to explain why did that happen. And if that rumor was wrong, we have to offensively say that this is a very nasty and detrimental rumor. And this is where historiography, or we as historians, are obliged to do this research. And I was happy to find out that Bubis was not an agent of the GDR. Excuse me, yeah, Galinsky was not. Let us have a short look on demoscopy, would you please, on the identity and identification of German Jews. 5 more minutes, Julius, I have finished. Okay, we had prepared everything. No, Insman. I'll summarize. Look, German Jews, since the early 19th century, we all know that from micro studies, distanced themselves from Jewish tradition. I found out empirically by historical demoscopy, kind of public opinion method, that between 80% and 90% of German Jews until 1993 did not give a damn about their Jewish heritage. On a representative level, ladies and gentlemen, on a representative level. If you want to find out, my book is called Deutschland, Jüdisch Heimatland. Has not been translated yet, but the figures are readable also in German. The figures are international. 80 to 90%. So therefore, the Holocaust is in a way a double tragedy of German and West European Jewry. First of all, the tragedy of being liquidated, and secondly, the tragedy of being liquidated for a heritage, for a tradition which they did not give much about. A terrible tragedy. The first one was tragic enough, but the second dimension of the Holocaust, of being killed for something which does not matter to you any longer. Can you imagine what that does mean? Terrible. Really terrible. And what happened to Jews in Germany since 1945? You would have, and so did I, and my research team, we expected that there would be a Jewish rebirth, i.e. a very strong Jewish identification among those Jews who, for whatever reason, stayed in Germany. But no. Again, about 60 to 70% chose not to identify themselves with Judaism or Jewish tradition. You can say 60 to 70% is less than 80 to 90%. You're right. But after the Holocaust, and then there was a turning point in 1967. I don't have to tell an Israeli public about 1967. Milchemet Sheshet Hayamim, the Six-Day War. So what does that mean? That does mean that a re-identification of Jewish heritage had much to do with Israel. With Israel, a country which they decided, for whatever reason, not to go to. So if Israelism and not Judaism had defined their Jewish identity, it's an absurdity, because you cannot play Israel in the diaspora. The late David Ben-Gurion, whom I always admired, said, אתה לא יכול להיות ציוני בחו"ל, בתפוצות, בלתי אפשרי, נקודה, גמרנו. לא אוהבים לשמוע את זה בתפוצות, אני יודע, אתם יודעים את זה. אבל לשחק ציונות בגלות, באירופה, בגרמניה, אבסורדי. So Judaism as an Israeli, Jewish identification as Israelism without Israel and without Judaism proper. All these things together have, of course, very clear implications for theology. for theology, namely the religious identification of German Jewish communities. On the one hand, you have a almost complete secularization, i.e. the growing distance to religion, and on the other hand, you have the dominance of orthodoxy. I hope, dear Walter, that progressive Judaism will make progress to change that, but analytically speaking, this is more wishful thinking, but I hope you do succeed. So in a way, in the long run, the German Jewish community will be also devoid of Jewish substance and Jewish contents. Economy and sociology, yes, 2 more minutes. No, I have no problem. The watch is objective. And economically speaking, Jews who were at the beginning there in Germany were very, very poor, but their mobility was upward from the very beginning, and at least in the 2nd generation, 3rd generation, economically very successful. To put it in a nutshell, the longer they are in Germany, the more successful they are economically. To sum up, ladies and gentlemen, yes, there has been a German Jewish resurrection. It has replaced rejection, but this German Jewish resurrection is so far more as far as hardware is concerned than Jewish substance is concerned. That is also mirrored with regard to top German Jewish representatives who speak much about Judaism, know less about it, and have an open mind by German officials who understand less, of course, about Judaism and Israel, but of course they are politically correct. So demographically speaking, it is highly doubtful that the Jewishness of the Jewish community will in the long run prevail. Intellectually, right now, as far as its official self-description and image is concerned, it is highly a-intellectual, anti-intellectual, but it is politically correct. What are the things to come? I don't know. Maybe this conference will find out. Lots of success. Thank you very much. 46 minutes. Thank you.